Yeah, I actually have an intro slide that I wanted to bring up because this is again. Okay, so this is me. I'm Mr. Beasley on the Pause AI Discord, and you might wonder why I look like that, and that's because here's the AAC crowd, right? These guys are just, caution in the wind, and they just go crazy, and they love everything, and they want to accelerate all of how everything works. So, a little suspicion against people that are accelerationist and not paying any attention to caution. And the other thing is that I wanted to bring up was like Will Patillo. You've got a great podcast. I love your writings on Less Wrong. Here's your Twitter feed. Go find Will on the Pause AI Discord channel. Like I mentioned before, your YouTube videos are awesome, talking about how to talk to people, how to convince people, how to be an effective communicator. I love all that. Plus, I love your game dev and I love VR. So go follow Will on all those places if you're interested in any of those things. Okay, so sorry, before we continue, let's do the sort of obligatory warnings and caveats here. I mean, yeah, obviously everything here, take it with a grain of salt. Predictions are hard, especially about the future. This is just my sort of main timeline. But yeah, who knows? Things are changing quite a lot all the time, so things are going to change. This is not financial advice, et cetera, et cetera. So that said, let's move on with the talk. Okay, so here we go. I wanted to give you some load-bearing claims right from the beginning, right? I don't want to bury the lead. I want to just be here's my claims right up front, and I have a bunch of slides. I got a bunch of slides to sort of talk about, Doom Train and my opinions, right?
Sure.
So here's my load-bearing claims. The first load-bearing claim I would say is that I feel like artificial superintelligence will develop nanotechnology. It will be smarter than a person. It will be smarter than all the humans, but I don't think it's going to kill all life. So this is sort of your existential risk. Existential risk, in my opinion, probably low, but very speculative. That's the first one. It's kind of prep. So the second one is about Pause AI, and I know that you're super critical in Pause AI, and I love the concept. I love Pause AI. I think it's a good idea, but I think we talked about it a little bit ahead of time. But trying to pause AI before we get this evidence of harm or warning shot is going to be hard. It's going to be hard, and it's probably not going to work. Pausing AI after this sort of large evidence of harm that I would expect is going to be more robust. And I'm sure that Pause AI already sort of considers this in part of their plan, right? And then I have another claim, and this is where I was talking about. I'm expecting that all the bugs in GitHub are going to be fixed. And you mentioned every repo and every bug. I mean, no, they're not going to do that. But basically, my idea is that OpenAI and Microsoft, they're going to want to increase the robustness of their own software stack, and their software stack is written on open source technology. So they're using all the same, they're using Kubernetes, and they're using Apache, and they're using big data. They're using all the same software that everybody's using. So they're going to want to go through GitHub with their PhD level coding agents and basically do SWE-bench on all of the applications that they use. So that's kind of my next claim. So they're going to go through and fix all of the main bugs in GitHub. And I have a little bit of math about this, but I would estimate there's probably millions of bugs and exploits in GitHub that they're going to want to fix. And of course, they're going to want to fix them on a deadline because, OpenAI is not the only PhD level coder. There's going to be a lot of coders coming in within a few months behind them trying to do the same thing, right? And then my last claim here is that I feel like, artificial superintelligence will basically just give up on human code and write its own internet and write its own networks and completely write all of the sort of digital technology. And I feel like all of these things, at least claim number 1 and 2, are going to happen before we get any kind of agentic robots, before we get any kind of military concerns, completely automated systems. I feel like this is the main crux, or this is going to happen in the next couple of years, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. So that's kind of my idea. And I like I say, I have slides and notes and stuff further on, and we can talk about it, but I'm just curious if you think that this is sound ideas or potentially harmful or something not even to consider.
Okay, so I'll start with looking at claims 2 and 3, or just start with claim 2. That seems plausible. I think that's kind of that's just like something I'd put like some amount of probability on, and it could kind of argue like up and down how much it would be. I think a lot of it comes down to like the economic incentives of what's driving the companies and like choices that they make. And I don't think I'm, very qualified to say how likely that is, like whether that's, something like that could happen or whether it's super likely. So I'd say kind of agnostic on that. I think it is true that we're going to see a lot more behind the scenes things than big flashy robotics, or at least big flashy effective robotics. I would say robotics that are eye-catching and like show off. There is a pretty strong incentive to create those for like fundraising reasons and for publicity and for them to like not be totally useless. So I would expect it around the same time that we're having big impactful things happening behind the scenes, like updating GitHub repos or figuring out like logistics kind of stuff. There's also robots being used in like some special case scenarios that are effective and have an impact, but are like niche applications.
Absolutely. Of course, these things are going to happen at the same time. I mean, there's going to be the robotics is going to continue, and you're right, it's already getting crazy scary. I mean, when you watch that thing on wheels rolling down a mountainside, and you're driving through the water. I mean, you just imagine putting a gun and a chainsaw on that thing, and now you're getting a very scary situation. But I just don't think these robots are going to be fully autonomous. The reason is because they don't have enough brain power on the machine. So I imagine that there's going to be like large brains on the internet, huge brains, like gigantic brains, but also millions and billions of PhD level brains on the internet. And those things are going to be way more dangerous for humans than robots.
Yeah. In terms of actual danger, I absolutely agree.
And faster.
Yeah. What I'm getting at, and this might be relevant later, is that in parallel with these things that are developing that are really like genuinely dangerous, you also get these like little flashy demos of some like robot made by Boston Dynamics, like going toe-to-toe with a top human wrestler or something like that, which is like totally irrelevant. But
and that and also just drones. I mean, we've already seen how dangerous drones can be. Drones can attack tanks. Like, that's ridiculous. Drones can attack anybody. Drones can attack individuals in towns. Drones can do everything. So I honestly, and I would think like drones are probably far more dangerous than a humanoid sort of robot or even something rolling around on wheels. They're fast. They're deadly. They could potentially be everywhere. But again, building drones, effective drones, smart drones, it's going to take more time than it would to do this, to basically do the cyber security controls that are required. So I'll go through the slide really quickly and let's see. So basically, sure. I'm driving in on this. So this is Sam Altman's quote. Our internal benchmark will the 50th best programmer in the world will hit number 1 by the end of the year. So by 2026, we're expecting to have the world's best competitive programmer is going to be OpenAI large language model. That seems totally reasonable, and it's already getting there. The thing is that they're going to be able to have they're not only going to run one of these or 10 of these, they're going to potentially have millions of these, and that's going to be a little bit crazy. And what happens with these AGI companies? What are they going to do with these like PhD level, millions of PhD level programmers? So my feeling is obviously they're going to rent these machines on the internet, right? They're going to rent them to users and customers. Yes, they're definitely going to rent them. They're going to probably do some self-improvement, right? Anthropic's already doing this. Yeah, they're going to try to increase their own algorithms. Yes. They're going to build even more amazing products. I mean, if you have 1 million PhDs, right now, how many PhDs do they have? Like a handful? Imagine they had 1 million. They could probably write some amazing products. These are the things that are absolutely going to happen next year or this year, right? But what else are they going to do? And again, we talked about it a little bit, but they're going to try to improve their own cybersecurity footprint, right? It's a good idea. Their intellectual property, their large language models, super important. They're going to have to go through and fix all the bugs in their own services, all the bugs that they rely on, they're going to go through GitHub and they're going to try to fix those things. It's to their own best interest, and they have a million PhDs, so they're going to do that. And they're also going to use the model to protect the model. So that's kind of my expectation. They're going to start focusing on their own internal cybersecurity to increase their own walls around themselves, because they know that within months they're going to start being attacked by millions of PhDs from their competitors. Seems reasonable.
Yeah, I'd say this assumption is largely reasonable. I think the caveats I've provided were more along the lines of like there's other stuff going to be happening in parallel, but in terms of like the mainline strategy, this is probably like this is what the investors are thinking about.
Absolutely. And so the next thing to think about is that, the open source software that they run on, OpenAI, Google, Meta, they all run on the same open source software. Most of it's on GitHub. Microsoft bought GitHub in 2018 for $7 billion. So they literally own GitHub, and this is where all the open source lives, right? GitHub has 42 million repositories. Literally, they probably have billions of issues and human errors inside of there, right? These bugs generally, like the bugs inside of GitHub, generally exist for two reasons. There's lack of time and lack of intelligence. This is why there's so many billions of bugs on GitHub. We don't have enough humans and enough human time to fix it. If we had more intelligence, if we had more time, we could go through and fix these bugs. And some of these bugs aren't just bugs. Some of them are exploits, and we don't even know they exist, right? And again, AI researchers already know that the data on GitHub is critical, and that's why they invented SWE-bench. And SWE-bench is one of the best one of the best benchmarks, and they're already saturating SWE-bench. They're already getting to the point where, they have 500 problems on SWE-bench that they've hand-designed. OpenAI went through and built their own version of SWE-bench. They hand-designed it so that they have problems, they have solutions, and they're going to saturate SWE-bench. When they saturate SWE-bench, they're good. This is my claim, and I come to it a little bit. I talk a little bit about it here. Here's basically the timelines for SWE-bench. My expectation is this: as they saturate SWE-bench, and this is not, we're not talking about like tens or decades in the future. We're talking about 2025. They're saturating it already. There's 500 GitHub issues inside of SWE-bench. My expectation is that they'll just keep doubling that every year. They'll add 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000. They're going to keep adding more and more and more bugs into SWE-bench until they get to the point where they basically have 1 million bugs inside of SWE-bench. And those 1 million bugs are all of the basic software problems that exist in the world. And that sounds great. Oh, we're going to fix 1 million bugs on GitHub. That's awesome. But that's not part of the problem, because we also need to deploy those things.
One question I have on this, which isn't really a crux, but I think answering it might get into some of the details of how you're thinking about this a bit more, is you described earlier, like the reason there are all these like billions of bugs on GitHub is because humans just don't have enough time and intelligence, and push on that assumption a little bit. Like I would think that the reason there are so many bugs in code is because the incentives are such that people would rather create new functionality once software is like good enough to work, rather than make the existing software more robust, just because of like how the trade-offs work. So what change, and so if we were to like double the amount of human effort that was going into programming, that would create more bugs, not less, because there'd be more stuff. Yes, some of the bugs would get fixed, but mostly there'd just be more stuff. So what changes that dynamic when AI is involved? Why does it put more focus into bug fixing legacy software or old stuff rather than just making new things that add more bugs to the list?
Yes, excellent point. I'm glad you brought it up. Okay, so you're right. There's multiple different kinds of bugs in open source software. A lot of it is just features, nice to have. I mean, we probably shouldn't do this thing this way. We really should do it this other way. Someone will write an issue or just put in a to-do note and say, do this a different way. I don't like how this is implemented. We'd like to fix this in the future, but we're moving on to features and we're not fixing this bug. These are the kind of things that these large language models are going to go through and fix. they're going to find those things because they're obvious. They're literally labeled with the word to do, or they literally have an issue that describes the bug. But the large language models are going to find tons of exploits in libraries. This is a giant network of software libraries that connect and control each other. So as they fix, if they find a vulnerable exploit in an SSL library, they literally have to go through all the dependencies who use that. This could be a breaking change. This is going to have to implement fixes in hundreds of other repositories. And you can see how, like, finding a single exploit in SSL for us as humans right now is a drastic problem. You know, it requires hundreds of companies to just jump immediately, apply the patch, apply the fix, because now we're opening all of these companies, all of these banks, all of these governments, they're opening parts of their internet to exploits. You see what I'm saying? So yes, I agree that the LLMs are going to fix the bugs that are obvious exploits, if there is any. There's probably not a lot of super obvious exploits right now. We've had hundreds, thousands of humans working on these. But the LLMs are going to find exploits, and they're going to build exploits, and then they're going to have to build the exploit, prove that it works, and then patch the existing software so that the next LLM that comes 6 months down the road, when it finds the same way to exploit this piece of software, it's not available. You see what I mean? They need to stay ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, but I totally agree. I mean, and I kind of talk about this a little bit later on, but basically, yes, I think that these LLMs are basically, at some point, they're just going to be like, they're going to have to basically go bankrupt on human code. They're just going to be like, we cannot fix all the bugs in this human code. We need to rewrite all. We're going to have to rewrite this stuff. Like it may even go through and be like, okay, SSL, we're just going to have to rewrite this thing. We cannot leave it like this. If we leave it like this, there's 17 exploits. It's so hardly deeply encoded, all these exploits within this SSL library. We're going to write SSL version, whatever it is, 5 or whatever, and then everybody's going to have to move up to that version. You know what I mean? Because they know that there's another large language model that's 3 months behind that is going to find those 17 bugs. And when they do, it's hard to patch a piece of software for one bug. Imagine having to patch it for 17 bugs or 100 bugs or hundreds of thousands of versions of software. You see what I'm saying?
So the basic problem is that the security flaws that exist already are going to become much more significant when you can just assume that your competitors will be able to exploit them at a large scale. So now the incentive for fixing those gets a lot higher, and then meanwhile the logistics problems of, like, you know, assembling enough workers and enough time to fix it is less of an issue. Now, granted, there is that kind of economic pull of, like, hey, if you have all this optimization power and all this ability to write code, why not use that for making, like, tons more features? But
correct. No, you're absolutely right. And that's how humans work. I mean, you know, it's a classic 80-20 rule. We want to spend 80% of our time building amazing new features and 20% of our time fixing bugs. Yes, and you're right. Then, and all of those amazing new features, again, potentially they're going to be written by very smart, intelligent, large language models, and maybe they won't have a lot of exploits, or maybe they will. You know, and this is I don't know if you've read through this. Are you familiar with this one, "The History of the Future" by Rudolph L. It's Les Wrong Post.
I don't think so. But yeah, go ahead.
I just found it the other day. It's really good. I'll send you the link, but it's really good. He basically just describes, you know, how he thinks that software and things are going to change in the future. So yes, and in this description, he goes through 2025, 2027. He goes all the way 2030, 2040, and he basically describes how he thinks that things are going to change. And while reading this, I'm thinking to myself, we can't get that far because of this bug and exploit and cyber attack sort of situation. So right here, he says, and he basically gets onto this point. Oh, sorry, my pointer's up here. He gets onto this point right here. He says, basically in 2026, it remains true that existing code can be much more easily attacked since all you need is O6 or a Claude subscription. So basically what he's saying is he's expecting that in 2026, you'll have a large language model that will just basically be able to attack anything that's not recently updated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And And another good example is that I kind of 100% agree with that. If when you read the article later on, he says, well, cybersecurity is going to be run by large language models, and they're very intelligent. So the security and the exploits, they kind of increase in step order. The exploits come out, the cybersecurity comes out, and everybody's kind of stays together. We all kind of stay together. And that's kind of very, very hard for me to believe, just by knowing how much low-hanging fruit exists. And here's a good example. What he missed inside of this article is that there are a huge amount of software on the internet that is not and cannot be running the most current and stable version. Nearly 20% of Microsoft SQL servers are past the end of support. The end of support basically means they're years and years old. There's multiple, they're not running the most recent version. They're not even close. They're years and years behind. These SQL servers that have run out of support, there's millions of them, and they will be available to be attacked by large language models in ways that we haven't even imagined. And then, there's a huge amount of companies, this includes banks, governments, that are running on mainframes from the 70s, right? You know these. I forget the name of it, but there's so many banks that are running on mainframes. These things are not sustainable. This is how we operate our internet. This is how we operate our financial systems. These machines cannot be upgraded. And the software that controls the security for these machines, the firewalls, the network segmentations, the internet is going to be exploited, and these machines are right behind that firewall. So yeah, this is the danger that I'm talking about. And like I say, this to me is a problem that This to me is a problem that is going to show up within a year. So, for example, here I figured, okay, say we're in SweBench and we're adding 500 examples for SweBench to fix, right? And every year every 6 months we add 500 more because the large language models saturate the model. Give them another 500. After 5 years we get 1 million bugs. Like a large language model could fix 1 million bugs. Now, I went back to Gemini and I'm like, okay, well, how many orders of magnitude are there between 512 and 1 million? There's only 3.5. There's 3.2 orders of magnitude. What if each order of magnitude, which is kind of how large language models are scaling, what if each order of magnitude it takes 6 months? How long would it take for you to get from 512 to 1 million? 1 year. Mm-hmm. So it's somewhere between 5 years and 1 year. These large language models are going to be able to fix 1 million bugs. How long is it going to take to fix 1 million bugs? I mean, if you have 100,000 graphics cards, which all of them do. OpenAI has 100,000. Meta has 100,000. Everybody has 100,000 H100s. If each H100 takes 10 minutes to solve a bug, which is not unreasonable, these models can fix. Can already fix bugs in 10 minutes. They have the reasoning model. The reasoning takes time, but it's capped out at 30 minutes because that's all it takes. And these are PhD level problems, right? So if you have an H100 graphics card, it can fix a bug in 10 minutes. You have 100,000 of them. You could fix 1 million bugs in GitHub in 2 hours. Mm-hmm. But then what, right? Should we make 1 million pull requests against 1 million bugs on GitHub one day and then have humans review and merge those 1 million bugs? Well, no, we can't do that. Should we let the large language models review and merge their own code and make new versions of hundreds, thousands of pieces of open source software? No, we should not do that, right? Do we need to fix all of these bugs that these large language models find, millions of bugs? Yes, we need to fix them because in a few months, as there's only a few months lead at most before PhD reasoning models from competitors come through and also find all these bugs and zero-day exploits. That's my claim. My claim is this problem is going to be fixed in 2 hours, and then what? And then here I talk about these are all open source models. There's no these models are open to everyone. It's not like this is like closed source and competitors are going to have a hard time finding this code and finding these exploits and putting their PhD level super fast large language models onto these problems. No, they're going to be able to do that. You can go to GitHub and just rip the whole thing if you want. It's like no issue at all. There's no secrets. There's no hiding. These open source models run the internet. They run economies. They run every supply chain. They run every bank. So in my opinion, this will soon be the most important project. Microsoft, OpenAI, they'll all be going to GitHub, finding exploits, fixing exploits. And again, this is another way where there just is no moat.
Okay, so if I understand this argument here, and I don't think I want to spend a whole lot of time on claim 2 because I don't think this is a core crux. I maybe a little less confident about it, but that's because of out of model knowledge more than a specific flaw or reservation. But just basically to summarize this idea that fairly soon there is going to be large language model or AI-based software that is capable of fixing all of the bugs, which means also being capable of exploiting them. This is software that the world runs on and relies on, so it's very important. If it was all getting exploited left and right and not fixed, that would be a really big problem for the world. Yep. However, there are some fundamental bottlenecks to going from this is fixable to actually fixing it, such as legacy code bases and people having to review pull requests, or if it's just allow it to be totally automated, then there's also issues of trust. In a lot of these systems, so there isn't really a good way out in this, and so that kind of points towards stuff gets exploited and a lot of things collapse.
Yeah, exactly. And I get to the point. I think I have another slide here, but this is my mainline scenario where I feel like we're going to get to this point. And this comes back to the first argument, the one about pause AI. So maybe we can talk about this one next. Sure. But yeah, this is sort of my next. The next level is yes, if you go through GitHub and you find every piece of open source software and you fix every bug and you find every exploit, this software will do that. That's awesome. But that's just 20, it's an 80-20 rule. That's just 20% of the work. 80% of the work is actually rolling all that out. And if we can't roll that software out to all of the people that use that software on the internet, we're causing major companies, major banks, major governments to not be able to effectively operate. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, I think I'm in basic agreement on this. I mean, I'm a little bit less confident because I haven't had time to sit with it and see opposing arguments, that sort of thing.
I wanted to sort of throw this on you just to to see how it goes. But what about the timeline?
I'm just going to accept this premise.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't want to argue it. But what about the timeline? Do you think that this is something that could happen in a year? Having not even thought about it only for the last few minutes? Or do you think it's going to take multiple years and multiple decades before we just go through and start rewriting all this software? That's actually... I have a
pretty strong intuition for multiple years, but not multiple decades.
Yeah.
So, but honestly, okay, if it takes 3 years or 5 years instead of 1 year, who cares? Mm-hmm. I mean, it matters, but
yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And you're right. It's sort of a race. There's a bunch of race dynamics, but you're right. I mean, things like dangerous military applications or hacking into nuclear facilities and, being able to there's all kinds of race dynamics here. And you're right, drones, dangerous drones, autonomous systems. The question is this the most dangerous thing, or is there something else that's more likely? It's really hard to say.
Yeah, that's one place where it gets complicated. But I guess your basic issue though of you agree with this this exponential that's coming really soon. I'd say basically yes. I'd kind of relate it in a lot of ways to Moore's law. If you apply the actual math, it's kind of wrong. A lot there's really big and expanding errors over time in terms of actually applying it. But the basic idea that there's this exponential curve, yes. there is. So, if that process you're describing actually takes 5 years, I don't think that's defeats your argument in any sense. And now, if
It's
you put
still
it
very
up
dangerous.
yeah, if you put it up against some other competing theory that's happening, which like we have more confident reasons to say this will take 3 to 5 years, and it matters which one of those happens first, then that like little bit of timeline extension could matter. But like for now, I'm just gonna say, sure, claim 2. Sure. Let's run with this.
I think you're right. I think that's great, and I also think that the thing you mentioned earlier, like what of these harms that are reasonably expected, which of these would resonate the most with humans that want to be active and be activist and help to avoid problematic situations? And maybe like destroying the internet and banks, maybe that's one of those things. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is like robots and robotics. Maybe it's like just replacing everybody's job. Maybe that's a very dangerous thing that people are trying to avoid. In my mind, this is the most likely, but yeah, there's lots of options out there for people to focus on.
Yeah, and I think that quote you have at the bottom there of like, it's not going to be dramatic, it's not going to be an epic battle with the robot army, we just get more and more confused. I think I basically agree with that in terms of like what's happening, in terms of like things that matter and affect people's lives. The one caveat with that is, while this stuff is happening and is the mainline thing affecting the economy, there's also some robots doing like crazy stuff that's kind of scary. There's some people losing their jobs and complaining loudly about it.
Absolutely.
And there's these things that are kind of at the beginning phases of happening, that people are pointing to and saying like, look at this, when the thing that you're describing is like far more advanced.
Yes. And I think that the thing that I'm describing here impacts almost every human. Like if there's a drone army, or there's other kinds of people losing their jobs, it's horribly dramatic. Like if unemployment goes up to 5%, then 10 and 20 and 30%, especially in specific tech sectors like white collar job unemployment goes up to 30, 40, 50%. That's a huge amount of people that are hurt. But if the internet goes down,
right,
that's way worse.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that I could imagine happening on a similar timeline as this, and I think this actually probably helps your argument in some ways, is something that like analogous to more like social media, putting people in increasing like politicized silos by culture. And so that it gets harder and harder to talk across cultures because people just see more and more of stuff that they agree with or makes them angry or polarizes them in a particular way. That's been happening already. And what I could see expanding at an exponential kind of scale in the very near future, possibly like 1 to 3 years or so, is that then happening on a personal scale, where each person has like their own individualized worldview and individualized like self-reinforcement and siloing, so that it becomes, rather than just talking to someone, red state, blue state, for example, having a divide, there being a divide with your neighbor on that same kind of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And these large language models are going to be super awesome friends.
Mm-hmm.
In so much that you could even have like a whole group of friends that are just large language models. They're not even real. And these kind of things can happen. And that's not great. I mean, we want to be social with each other. We need to keep operating the world. We need to keep working. But in the same way, having a lot of friends is great, but more importantly, you need food and you need banks, right? I agree that the social media is a problem. Being social is mandatory for humans. We need to be able to do that, but we need all of our infrastructure to be functional. So
one question for you on all this. So let's say there's like a major internet shutdown, and like that's like a really big thing that happens. Who gets blamed for that in your view?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it all depends on the situation. We've seen minor examples of this. I mean, remember when that Cloudflare bug that crashed all the Windows machines a few months ago and crashed all the blue screen of death in every airport and multiple banks. who was to blame for that? I mean, they pushed out a bug, they pushed out a release, and they didn't really test it properly, and it was kind of their fault. But then, like, the whole world kind of worked together to patch and upgrade their systems and infrastructure. And yeah, a lot of people were, harmed time-wise because they had to sit at an airport while their Windows machine was rebooting with blue screens of death. People couldn't pull money out of ATM machines, right? There was some harm. Maybe somebody even got hurt inside of a hospital. Like, I don't know how bad that is, but that was a small example of what could happen. Mm-hmm. And in that case, yeah, we blamed Cloudflare. They pushed the update. They didn't test it properly. They were instrumental in fixing the problem. But I mean, even everybody's company was impacted. Everybody who had a Windows machine, everybody who had Active Directory, everybody who had Microsoft SQL servers, all these machines crashed. Again, a tiny example of what could happen if one of these large open source pieces of software, and that was a closed source, I mean, that's Windows, right? Mm-hmm. The internet doesn't run on Windows. The internet runs on OpenSSL, Linux, Ubuntu, Kubernetes. Like, these are the kind of things that really run the internet, that really run the banks. If that kind of thing happened in one of those pieces of software, the harm would be much more catastrophic. And I think it could take down the internet, maybe temporarily. It could take down parts of the internet. It could shut down multiple companies. It could shut down multiple companies for multiple weeks, And then the question is, who is to blame? And obviously, if anybody is doing these kind of, I mean, in that case, that Cloudflare bug was just a bug inside of a piece of software. There's no need to suspect that it was a malicious harm. But I feel like malicious harm could definitely be the source of these issues going forward. And if you're going to do malicious harm like this, you're going to want to stay hidden. So we won't know who to blame.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I'm ready to move on to the next claim in this. I think this will. I think it's good to have spent some time with this because this is kind of one of the things that's a little bit more unique and something that you're putting out there in terms of a worldview.
Yeah,
but I don't think I really have a meaningful disagreement here.
Yeah, this is great, and you're right. I haven't posted this at all, but I'm going to post it on the Pause AI. I'm going to put the whole slide deck together. I've been working on this slide deck obviously for a little while. I'm looking for counter arguments, and I've been finding them here and there. I'm definitely going to have a lot of counter arguments. There's going to be a lot of people that disagree, but and we already know that this is a problem. Like cybersecurity, mm-hmm. when we talk about, I think I have a slide that talks about the here AI safety frameworks, right? So. This is where I'm talking about the first evidence of harm. And I definitely feel like it's possible that these bugs and these exploits that are inside of GitHub being patched, being deployed, this could be one of the first evidences of harm. And if and when that happens, like I say, individual companies could be damaged, the internet could be damaged, supply chains, how people get food and grocery stores could be damaged, airports, all these things could be damaged. So when we look at these safety frameworks that Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, they've been putting them out, they generally do talk about CBRN, which is your chemical, biological, nuclear. These are potential threats because these large language models can help people to do these very dangerous things. But I feel like in my mind, the cybersecurity it's just low-hanging fruit. There's so many bugs. There's so much dependency on our society, on all of this internet software to work. That's why I feel like, yes, these are risks. These risks exist, but the cyber risk is just it's much higher.
Okay.
But yeah, so anyway, so we can talk about that. My next claim here is that basically it's kind of simple, but once we get to this superintelligence, the human level code is not going to be something that's going to be available or active anymore. Human level code is limited by the human levels of intelligence and algorithmic discoveries, right? Humans have written all this software. We have a limited amount of intelligence. If these machines get more intelligent than us, ASIs will know better than us. They'll basically just start writing things from scratch. They'll start writing their own services. They'll start writing their own networks. These superintelligence, this is sort of speculative into the future, but they're basically going to have to start doing this, and we won't really understand how this software works. it would seem, I would be shocked if a large language model was going to write a piece of software. It comes back to this, actually. So I don't know if you heard about this, but Andrew Karpathy talks about software 2.0 and software 1.0. Have you caught one?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So basically, like, software 1.0 is basically how we write software now, but in his mind, software 2.0 is basically like an algorithmic system to solve problems. So you're going to use things like gradient descent to find algorithms to solve problems. Rather than writing logic trees, you're going to use algorithms to find optimal solutions. It seems totally reasonable that would be something that a very intelligent model would want to do. Like, why write all this logic when you can just use gradient descent to solve problems for you? But this is the kind of thing, that humans will not be able to understand. And it will become necessary. Like, you won't be able to run your software on the internet unless it's secured in a way that other language models cannot exploit.
Right. So I'm seeing the kind of overall framing of this as being that dynamic you were describing earlier leads to this collapse of the software infrastructure on the world. And then what happens next? This is what Claim 3 comes into, is like, okay, what happens after this major
assuming we survive this whole cybersecurity attack and game of cat and mouse, then I think the only solution is going to be just basically rewriting all of the internet, all of the software.
Well, I want to point out that there's two paths, and I think it's important to say, like, why you think one is super relevant is, okay, so there's these vulnerabilities that exist in human code, and we have a problem of, like, attacking them becomes available much sooner than, like, totally patching and fixing everything. Right. And I think you've defended that fairly well. So then that leads to this, systemic collapse of, like, a lot of things that are based on these systems fall apart as all these exploits come out and people use them. Yeah. And then there's kind of two routes we could take. One is to really crack down on the people making the exploits and breaking all the things and taking away their tools, finding out who they are, all that sort of thing. And then the other one is to say, there's no way we're going to do that. We just want everything back online. And so we're going to rebuild all of this stuff in a way that isn't hackable from the beginning, and just have these systems write their own code. And the way humans built it, that didn't work. So now we need to go this other route that actually can stay ahead of these attacks. And at that point, we're basically just handing over the keys, handing over control to AI at that point to recreate all the stuff that our economy relies on, but better this time. And at that point, we have no idea what's going on. The AI is kind of controlling the global infrastructure. And at that point, I can see where you'd be going with this is, like, there's a certain degree of point of no return at that point. Like, because once we've given over that level of control, we better trust these things. And if we haven't developed that sense of trust, which, alignment problem and all that, we haven't, then that's a really big problem, or moves in the direction of a really big problem that we will at that point have given up the means to defend against.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, like I say, if you read this article, unless wrong, he describes how this process would continue in the future. Cybersecurity becomes a problem for LLMs. Software and services becomes a problem for LLMs. Humans don't really do much of that anymore. And again, that could work great, or maybe not. There could be having super intelligent, organisms living in a digital space, attacking each other and trying to destroy each other, or trying to compete for resources on your little planet. It seems very scary. Potentially not even in a physical way. I mean, maybe they're doing everything digitally, but maybe they're at some point they're just like, okay, I'm gonna have to just take out this data center. Like, I'm a large language model, and I really need resources, and this data center is sucking up all my electricity from this power plant. So I'm just gonna all of these things seem very scary.
All right. So before I go into any criticisms here, I've just kind of like imagined where you were going with Claim 3. I want to let you just step through that, sure. Make sure that we haven't skipped it. I think I know where you're going with this, but I want to verify it. And I don't think I'm going to have where I expect this argument to go is I agree with claim 2, and I agree that like then there's like a branching point, and one way that can branch is claim 3, and claim 3 leads to like destruction and not very good stuff. But whether claim 2 goes to claim 3 is going to depend on claim 1. And I think claim 1 is where all of our disagreements are going to be. But let's just go through 3, and I'll probably just mostly agree with all of it in context.
Yeah, this one is super speculative, but yeah, basically I'm just saying that this is your regular AI takeover situation. Once ASI starts rewriting all of its own software, we don't really understand how services work on the internet. I mean, maybe it's still able to do all of our supply chains for us. Maybe it's still able to deliver all of our food. Maybe it's able to deliver electricity. Maybe it's able to help us build housing, and maybe it's able to like keep the internet so we can talk to each other on the cell phones. Maybe it's going to do all these amazing services for us. Like maybe it's going to be awesome. Maybe not. We don't know. But what I do think is going to happen is that the ASIs are going to need humans. I mean, and this has been talked about by lots of people, but it's going to need humans to do things like deliver power and run data centers and run networks for it. I mean, it doesn't have fingers and hands and toes and arms and legs at this point, so it's going to need humans for this. And then at some point, this is probably one of the humans' last jobs, is to start building humanoid robots to replace all of the humans that are doing all the things that the language models need to do. Providing power, keeping generators, keeping power plants running, installing solar panels, running data centers, running networks, installing physical machines. It's going to build humanoid robots, and a lot of people have talked about this. I mean, it's reasonable that humans could probably make 10 billion humanoid robots in a matter of a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of hope that we do that, because a human could also be converted into a humanoid robot. So that's the other option that's possible, that is just gruesome to imagine, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I've seen Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, taking over somebody, or that guy in Star Wars with the band around his head. You know what I mean? He's kind of like a robot, but he's a human, and we don't want that. That's the other option. I mean, if LLMs need someone to build a data center, maybe they can get humans to do it. Maybe they can get humans to do it in multiple different ways. You can motivate them with money. You can motivate them with lots of ways. You can motivate people in a lot of different ways.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm hoping that we get 10 billion humanoid robots. But then the question is, after there's 10 billion humanoid robots living on planet Earth, providing everything that these large language models need, the humans are just part of the scenery, or just part of the natural ecosystem. And again, it's like, well, does it want to keep the natural ecosystem? Maybe it needs those resources for something else. So once complete, all the power plants will be run by robots.
So one asterisk I want to put here, I basically agree with the trajectory of this claim. One thing that I think is a little uncertain here is whether this kind of process is driven by the ASI knowing better and kind of directing it, or whether it's because of like human owners who made the choice to go this direction with like restructuring the internet, for the same reasons, making the same choice for making the process self-sustaining, because they don't want another collapse.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at this point, once we get to claim 3, the humans don't really have any say. Humans have no input on this situation at all. This thing is already way smarter than any human. It's doing its own thing, and we're just there to help it out. We become the helping thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of an academic distinction at this point, like whether it's the AI like controlling it and humans don't have a choice, or whether it's like humans have a nominal choice, but like the incentives are so stacked in one direction that it'd be crazy for them to make the wrong choice, and even if they did, social dynamics would like push it the other way and they get fired or whatever else. So yeah, I'll kind of go with you basically on claim 3, with maybe some uncertainty as like to how exactly it plays out.
Yeah.
But sure.
Yeah, that's kind of the claim 3 is basically like, the start is with the internet, but then, it just kind of moves forward from there. And then it comes back to claim 0. After claim 3, I mean, I feel like ASI is going to be very smart, very intelligent. So in claim 0, I'm saying that I'm not usually convinced that ASI will stop all life on Earth, because life is fairly unique as well, as far as we know. And also, like, the more humans learn the more we try to keep original natural spaces around us, right? So this is my claim, is that it's possible that the ASI might, even though it's also trying to grow and expand exponentially, it might try to keep parts of the Earth in its natural state.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a great solution, but I don't. And basically, this is an argument against the sort of paperclip maximizer. I think the thing is going to be smart enough that it's not going to want to do something silly. But I also realized that the argument for the paperclip maximizer, Eliezer wasn't literally talking about metal paper clips. He was talking about molecular spirals. The molecular spirals are a way to generate energy. So it's not generating paper clips because it just wants to do some stupid thing. It's generating paper clips or spirals because it's using them to generate more energy. It wants a molecular way to generate energy. And that is completely reasonable. But you understand the distinction between doing something stupid like making paper clips or doing something intelligent like generating spirals to create energy.
I wouldn't call it necessarily a stupid versus, intelligence sort of dynamic. But I think the value of, you are correct that was like the original intention of the analogy. It wasn't just some factory that said, maximize the number of paper clips and it did that. It was more like, for some reason, it was going after some other goal that seemed like, oh yeah, someone would totally put this in. And then that led to, well, it turns out the most efficient way to do this would be to tile as much space as possible with this really efficient design. Maybe it's because you're wanting to maximize happiness, but happiness of what? And what is the most efficient way of representing a thing that can be satisfied? Or something weird like that.
Yep.
I think, I would contend a little bit with the, some humans get left in some nature preserve kind of thing. That could happen. I've had that argument recently, and I'm kind of bored of it in a way because that's a really awful future. And arguing about whether there's 10,000 humans left or zero.
But if there's 8 billion humans left or 10 billion humans left, I mean, what if the environment that the ASI wants to maintain is the entire planet? Because it feels like, I should really keep this planet intact because I'm looking around on all these telescopes and I don't see any other planets like this that has this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? I think it's not entirely unreasonable to think that this super intelligent thing might want to keep the planet in a reasonably natural state.
Yeah, I think that's something we could argue against about, and I'm pretty skeptical of that. Although one thing that occurs to me that is a kind of reasonable concession is that there isn't necessarily a fundamental difference between leaving some little nature preserve like New Zealand, for example, versus the entire planet. When you're at a larger scale, if there's a real incentive to leave something, then why not make that something a little bigger? Yeah. I would have a pretty strong intuition against the leaving something, but that's an argument that's been made elsewhere, and maybe we can
right here. Actually, this is your quote from Max Long, and I think this is a great counter argument. And basically what you're saying is people say things like, surely superintelligence will understand that it's better to cooperate with humans, or if it really doesn't like us, it's going to rocket off into space and it's going to leave us alone. There's so much more out there. Why would it attack her? And I think this is an excellent counter argument. These kind of things make perfect sense, but also the argument that life seems rare. And the reason why the life seems rare is because our solar system is insanely weird. The perfectly circular orbits, the planets where they are, the liquid water, the gas giants, stopping comets from smashing into the inner planets. Our solar system is so freakishly weird. When you look at telescopes of all these solar systems, the planets are huge. It's like giant gas giants right on Mercury-sized orbits. Their elliptical orbits are the most common thing. I don't even think we found any circular orbits, or they're very rare at least. So I mean, this solar system, to be able to design it, to be able to have it evolve in this way, if you go and mess that up, there's a chance that even a super intelligence might not be able to easily recreate this environment. So we might be better off just going off of Centauri. I mean, you want energy, boom. But again, that's your argument. That's your counter argument. And here's the full post, and I recommend anybody watching definitely read this.
Thanks for the shout out.
Yeah.
I guess in a very short sense, like that quote that you gave a moment ago, I was like kind of caricaturing the rationale for AI leaving the Earth alone. The basic reasons against why I kind of think the like leaving some people around as being likely issue is, well, two ways to think about it. One is if like there's a single AI like controlling everything, then it's like, okay, one, there needs to be something that it values that is really well served by having some natural environment around. And second, whatever interest that is serving, that actually needs to be the best way to get it. It can't just like make an artificial zoo that is more strange and more unique and more diverse than the Earth is, and it can't figure anything like that out. The other one is if there's some kind of competitive pressure, like there's multiple AIs kind of like working with each other, and that could happen in a multipolar scenario, or just a single one at the top, like it's like divides up and like what is a single entity, and there's parts competing with each other, which is kind of more the view in the substrate needs convergence series, which is based on someone else's idea, but I'm just kind of articulating it. And that's kind of gets down to that kind of gets like to the issue of like why humans have left some environment but not very much, is because like all of us, like if there was one person controlling everything, there'd probably be a lot more nature preserves, because like people just like being in the natural world. We like that it exists. We don't want to destroy animals and ecosystems and all that sort of thing, but we do it anyway.
Like to compete. We like to compete with each other, and we like to dominate our environment, and we like to control our environment in the way that we want. And I think you're right. I mean, this claim basically assumes that there's a sort of unipolar situation. If we get to the point where there's multiple, super intelligences, and they have the ability to control things on a molecular level, or even have access to millions of robots, and they're attacking and fighting each other to try to maintain their resource levels, I mean, that is a drastic, and that's basically the doom level at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think let's just agree to have slightly different intuitions here, and I'm happy to move on to past claim zero.
So then we'll come back to, let me see. So we talked about claim 3, somewhat speculative. So let's go back to that was claim 0, which I thought was great. And then so now claim number 1. So basically, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but basically I'm kind of on the side here of agreeing with Sam Altman. This quote is from pretty recently, 2022. But Sam said that ChatGPT is a small preview of what's to come. Absolutely true. I think he said this multiple years ago. We've seen the thing is like drastically changed. But he also said in the same interview that I don't think that stopping it will work. And I kind of agree with that right now. I don't think that stopping it is going to work currently. Like pausing AI and the whole pause AI movement, it's as you know, it's a very popular position among humans, and more, especially like non-technical sort of normie humans. They love this idea. I mean, AI is very creepy, but there's also the business interests, right? Among business leaders and among governments, it's not a very popular position, and the reason I think is because there's speculation of harm from AI, a lot of speculation, but no hard evidence. I would also consider unprecedented unemployment or unemployability to be for knowledge workers to be known for harm. So plus also like race conditions. These companies can't really stop, even if they find safety issues. They shutting down is not really an option at this point. AI models are currently low power. They're pretty hackable. So I expect them to, I expect some low hanging fruit. I basically expect bad actors to be able to use large language models to start stealing. This is sort of the argument is basically, it's not going to work right now. I mean, obviously, I say you got, Pause AI is an activist organization. You got to prep as much as you can. You need to be active. You need to be vocal. You need to educate people, because once you get to the point where this first evidence of harm does start happening, and it could be things like companies being stolen or cybersecurity or worse, they need to be able to have mechanisms in place to stop and control these language models from being able to do whatever insane thing they can do. But yeah, it's
there
a time thing.
More slides to this? Okay.
Yeah. So let's continue. So I talk a little bit about the frameworks, and like I say, CBRN is very dangerous, but I feel like cyber attacks. The important thing here is when it comes to safety models, there's some Anthropic and OpenAI and Google, they publish their safety models. Meta has one now recently, but these open source models, Quinn or DeepSeek, they don't really have any safety frameworks. They don't even talk about it. So it's important to understand the difference between approaches. And I think this quote from Zvi is really critical. It's Meta vastly increased their framework in that they didn't have a framework in the past. He's very skeptical. I don't expect them to abide by the spirit, I do expect them to abide by the spirit of this framework, because the spirit of this framework is to not care. This is very common, I think, that half of the industry will kind of care, or at least say they care. Half of the industry will kind of say they care, and then another maybe by thirds, and a third of the industry is just not even going to have an option to pause. Yep. So the governments will have to step in at that point and say, you can't do this if there's been evidence of harm. So here we talk about, I talk about the warning shot, the first evidence of harm. So I don't think that stopping it will work. And then here Sam Altman talks about having the best programmers. So in my opinion, pausing AI before this first warning shot is unlikely. Pausing AI after after a sort of a warning shot or cause of harm suddenly was going to become a very viable option. And again, this is where preparation comes in, because if we're not prepared for this viable option, we could miss it. If there's a big evidence of harm, the next big evidence of harm could be within days or months afterward. If we don't stop things very quickly, then we could have multiple evidences of a harm, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, so for the first warning shot, I mean, chemical and biological are possible, but I would expect cyber. I would expect cyber because it's faster, cheaper, and better, so it's more likely. So the being able to steal is much easier than being able to build a biological weapon. And I would expect that, these PhD level coding models are potentially, for example, they might steal $10 billion from some company or from some bank. I would expect these large language models to potentially shut companies down. Just DDoS attacks could become more insane. And that after this happens, if a company is able to use a large language model to, 100,000 PhDs to develop a piece of software that can go in and actually steal multiple billions of dollars from a bank, siphon all that money into some cryptocurrency, use some kind of tornado to sort of anonymize all of this money that they've stolen. If they're able to actually get away with it, then of course there's going to be a huge investigation, and after this huge investigation, then stopping AI and LLMs might be a possibility, but probably not before. And then, okay, so this is this is another one of your articles. You posted here lenses of control. I don't know if you remember this one, but the main takeaway that I got from this one was the burden of proof is on the developers to prove safety, not for the public to prove danger. Perfectly reasonable, right? But here's my argument against it. And I'll have a little bit of a situation, right? So imagine, let's do an analogy. I'm basically going to describe that these developers kind of have proven safety already, and that sort of works to their favor. So imagine I made my own car in my garage, right? I developed my own car. I built my own car. I'm a car engineer or whatever. I built a car. I built it in my garage. My kids, my wife, they use it. They drive it. It's awesome. It's comfortable. It's fuel efficient. They love the car. They love the car that I built for them. I'm a car developer, and I built them a car. And then one day I go to my wife and I say, listen, I replaced the fuel filter in the car, so I made an upgrade. I made a change to this car, and now I think the car is going to explode tomorrow. Right? So what is my wife going to say? She's going to be like, what? The car's going to explode tomorrow, but I got to drop the kids off at soccer. And she's going to say, that sounds really bad. What, do you smell a leak? Is there gas coming out? Like, is there leaking? Like, what makes you think the car's going to explode tomorrow? And I'm going to say something like, no, I don't see any leaks, and I'm not really sure. And, gas is explosive. I have a bad feeling. There's no evidence, but I have a bad feeling about this, right? And then she's going to say, okay, there's no leak, so you don't smell any gas. You're sure about that? And I'm going to say, no, everything looks good, but, I just have a bad feeling. She's going to say, okay, that sounds bad. Let's get a second opinion. And I say, okay, great. Good idea. So I take the car to the mechanic, and I take it to 3 different mechanics, and all the mechanics say, yeah, I don't see any evidence of harm. I mean, everything looks good. I mean, you made your own car, which is kind of weird. I don't know everything about it. I don't understand how everything of that works, but a car looks good. So then I'm going to go back to my wife, and I'm going to say, yeah, I took it to 3 mechanics, and there's no evidence that it's going to blow up. I still got a bad feeling about it. I'm kind of an expert on this thing because I built it, but I don't know. And she's going to be like, okay, thanks. I don't believe you. I'm going to go, come back to me when you have some evidence. I'm going to go take the kids to soccer. And she drives away. This is exactly what's happening right now with large language models and AI safety. In this case, I have proven safety. The car has been working perfectly for years. If my claims of risk and harm come with only speculation, no tangible evidence, then they will not be taken seriously, even if the risk is high. So in this case, I'm literally telling them that you could blow up, but there's no evidence. Not going to be taken seriously. And that's kind of a bit of an analogy. I mean, this is like, the whole pause AI situation is just awesome theories, amazing speculation, but that's about it. And that's why we're in this place. So, and I don't think it's wrong. I still feel like working towards this goal is good, but just keep in mind that you've got to keep your sort of powder dry, because when this evidence of harm comes, which could happen quite soon, you want to be ready for it. So I basically lay out the same argument here. I'm basically saying pausing AI before evidence. I mean, not only do I think it's not going to happen, same thing with what Sam Altman said. I mean, we can't stop it at this point. It's not even going to last. Like, if large actors see, it's just going to move. It's going to basically create a black market. Even if we do get to the point where we can pause AI, it's going to move a lot of people into other countries, other environments where it's not paused. These kind of things are going to happen. And it's going to be very unrobust, even if we get to that point. But, after this first evidence of harm happens, then I would say, yeah, this is what people need to think about. In my mind, this is kind of where we're going. And again, I'm hoping that the evidence of harm is going to be like the internet is shut down or somebody steals a bunch of stuff. The evidence of harm could be a lot worse than that. But the key takeaway is like timing. Timing is critical. Anyway, so that's that argument.
Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of things I disagree with on this one, and not just a whole speculative thing. So thanks for bringing this up. And actually, I think you articulated some of these core objections that come up quite often in a very concise way, which makes it a lot easier to respond to. So thank you for that. So I'll start off by kind of describing some things about what the pause position is that I think a lot of people get wrong. These might not 100% apply to some of the things that you've said. So, I apologize in advance if I'm like straw manning some things a little bit. But it gets at some of the core ideas. So the first thing is, well, okay, I guess one in a broad picture of your total argument. I kind of agree that if we're just kind of continuing on the existing path and nothing major changes, there's never any coordination that happens at any point. And just economic and competitive incentives just continue carrying the day. I think we're not going to make it. And we can argue about what not making it looks like. But that's a little less interesting. And getting more to how like the pause proposal works is it is very much not by just capturing some top levels of government and key decision makers and getting some like pause dropped in out of the, like some coordination dropped in out of the sky that no one who's making decisions really wants, and we're just dragging basically everyone along, where everyone wants to defect. Everyone wants to race ahead, and they're just not doing that because of some rules that came from somewhere. Like that would not hold up for a minute. And yeah, I agree with that. I guess one way of getting at this is, like if you imagine something like a 5-minute pause, not like, not indefinite, not 6 months, something like really trivial. That's like 5 minutes, and that's all it is. But it's actually like happens that like all AI, a moment of silence or something.
Where it's silence to just reflect on what we're doing here. I think it's a great idea.
Right. So imagine. I would contend that something like that is actually really transformative, more than just like a little bit of reflection. And that could seem like a very strange claim. Like, what could possibly happen in 5 minutes? And
maybe like a day or even a week or something. But yeah,
I'm making this argument hard on myself by making it really short, because this really focuses on the thing that matters, which is what happened before then. Why was that possible? Mm-hmm. So going kind of back to front, one thing that you need for like a 5-minute pause is that there needs to be mechanisms for monitoring and enforcement. You have to actually know that everyone's abiding by this and have some means of stopping people who are defecting. Like that has to be figured out. Which means that there was people who know how to figure these things out who are actually working on it. It also means that, like, if something's being enforced and something's actually being monitored, that means there's like a strong force, strong pushes towards making that happen, which assumes that there's buy-in. It assumes that all the individual countries that are like the major power players, at least, all actually want this thing. They're not going to do this if no one's telling them to. They have to want it, and they have to have communicated with each other and like gotten past communication barriers of like, oh, we don't talk to that country. Like they have to be past that and say like, I want this, they want this, I know they want this, they know I want this. Like we've gotten into all that, and we've also want this enough to give up the certain degrees of national sovereignty or personal sovereignty to be able to allow the other side to monitor me and bind me, because that's worth it, so that I can also bind them and monitor them on this thing. Yep. So like that means actually caring something about it enough to be willing to make that trade-off and to have gotten past the communication barriers. All of that, if that doesn't happen, then the 5-minute pause doesn't happen. The longer pause doesn't happen unless that's already in place. Yeah. And then what does it take to get those individual countries to buy in? Well, in democracies, at least, that means it's in the politicians' incentives. If they want to stay elected, they have to care about this kind of thing, which basically means their incentives are pushing in this direction, not just some, particularly gung-ho, like very active senator, like makes it happen against the will of their constituents, against their political incentives. Like, no, it has to actually be their incentives, which means that there's like a really strong like movement pushing in that direction. So the buy-in's not just some like leaders got, persuaded, but it's actually like they're following their incentives and then, acting on them.
I love this idea. This is when you first described it, I was like 5 minutes of silence where we just think about it. But honestly, what you're talking about is incident management. It's incident preparation. It's sort of wargaming a dangerous situation. And the reason why we're doing this 5-minute pause is because we feel like there's a situation in the future where a large language model could do a thing that's really bad, and we noticed that it did a thing, and in order for an abundance of caution, we're going to tell that company, you need to stop doing that thing right
Right.
now. And not only are we going to tell that company you need to stop, we have a reasonable suspicion that there's 5 other companies that are doing exactly the same thing, and they haven't
Right.
reached this point yet. But we're also going to tell all those guys to stop. And guess what? Everybody has to stop. And maybe we're not, and again, this is sort of like incident preparation. We're just preparing for the possibility that this could happen in the future. In order to get to the situation, we need to be convinced that this could happen.
Right.
For real,
and
not just in the war gamey kind of scenario.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, the Pause AI is not advocating for a 5-minute moment of silence. We're advocating for an open-ended sort of thing. But I'm making that point to get exactly what you were saying at. And another way of phrasing it is that if there was a big red stop button for AI, and before you can hit that button has to exist. And building it is not trivial.
Yeah.
So really, in a way, we're kind of like
and
advocating.
Also, it's not going to happen by itself. It's not going to happen automatically. It has to be mandated by government. There's a 0% chance. I mean, Sam Altman might have a piece of software on his laptop where he can just say stop training, and he might be able to pull out his laptop and run some script to stop some training. Like these kind of things might exist, but to mandate by law that this actually happens and it works. In order to make sure that something works, you have to have tried it at least once.
Right. So that's kind of a core argument. Before you can so we're arguing for hitting this big stop button, but really what that hitting this is for is to motivate creating the stop button, which in turn requires people wanting to create it. And it's that getting started on that preparation as soon as possible, because it takes time. Like if we just wait and do absolutely nothing until there is a problem, and okay, now we have the political capital, we have everything. Hey, all these mechanisms don't exist yet because we're just starting on it now. That's the thing that we want to avoid is to start doing the homework in advance.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. My question for you though is, do humans work like this? Is there evidence that this kind of thing has happened before? Is there a reasonable expectation that this could even happen? I mean, I feel like it could happen if you guys continue to grow and the protests continue to grow. We have hundreds of thousands of people in the street, but those hundreds of thousands of people in the street literally need to be saying exactly the same thing, and it has to be a reasonable thing. And it's not like that right now. It's kind of random, right?
Yeah, I'll say honestly, as much as I'm working on this stuff and being involved, I'm on the odds, I'm not super optimistic. I think I would be if we had 30 years.
Yeah.
At the current rate of growth versus the rate of tech capabilities advancement. Kind of the theory of change is that we kind of have this natural organic growth that we're involved on, and given 30 years or so, that might be enough to get somewhere. Where the warning shot comes in is we need to make 30 years of progress in 3 years, and how do we? There's a saying that there's no impossible goals, only impossible timelines, and the timeline we're working on is kind of impossible. The warning shot may be a way of shortening that timeline.
Yeah. And again, I think I would say the same thing too. If you're right, if there is a warning shot, not even if, when, when there's a warning shot, when there's some serious evidence of harm, then building that big red stop button is likely going to become an obviously necessary solution. Where now it's kind of kind of a cool idea, but after this thing happens, it's going to be obviously required.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really important, in preparation for that happens, is if there's this moment where it becomes clear to everyone that we need to build this stop button, metaphorically speaking, we're in a lot better place if there's already a theory of what the real problem is and what's going on, and there's even a schematic drawn up for what needs to happen, and there's just the only thing that's lacking is political will. Now that's in place, and bang, we're ready to go. Yeah.
And that's a really good. Something that comes into my mind though is what does the red stop button do? what does it actually do? Like, does it stop training runs? Does it stop inference? Does it shut down websites? Does it stop people from being able to log in at openai.com? Like, what does the red button actually do?
That's a complex question, and more than I think that gets a little bit outside of my own expertise. However, some things I would point to is Control AI put this document together called a narrow path that goes into a lot of detail in terms of like what needs to happen. Pause AI has kind of been like staying on the philosophical level because our focus is really on giving regular people a way to participate more than it is like getting out the details of a plan. But there are other organizations like Center for AI Safety and Control AI who are doing a lot more and like really fleshing out the policy of what needs to happen. I think what Pause AI is probably going to do is just like find work from these more think tank type organizations and say, yeah, this is
advocate for those, yeah. And collect people that are uneasy and point them into the direction of supporting these organizations that will help us to solve this problem. Not saying we have the solution, but we need to focus people in the right direction, potentially even like donating money to them, helping them in any way you can, advocating for them, putting them on your social media, letting people know that these these people that are talking about these alignment issues, they exist, and we need to help them help us.
Yeah, and that gets to like basically Pause AI's basic reason for existence is that like prior to this, you founding this organization, there was already like the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, like figuring out what the alignment problem was. There was already Dan Hendricks and the Center for AI Safety that was working on like a lot of policy interventions and ideas. But the thing was, like, if you were a grocery store clerk and you were concerned about AI and you wanted to do something about it, you couldn't. Like, Dan Hendricks is not going to hire you. Miri isn't going to hire you. And so do you just have to just
donate,
continue going to your job every day and hope that things work out and hope that the elites like make the right choice? Like that's kind of a shitty place to put people. So we wanted to be able to say like, hey, regular people we're going to give you it'll be small, it'll be like a piece in a much larger thing, but we want to give you a way to get involved. Like that's our reason for existence.
And something useful to do with your time, because a lot of people potentially have time, but they don't have a lot of monetary, they can't do a lot of monetary support. But it's like, okay, well, maybe you have a day off, maybe you can help with this, and that way, because like I say, I could see someone donating $5 and hoping for the best, or maybe even like if they're really concerned, they could even like go out and get another job and potentially donate something to a nonprofit with the funds they make a separate job. But yeah, I mean, having something to do that you can spend your time at and you can feel like you're actually solving the problem or moving in the right direction is great.
Yeah, and making sure you know what the getting a sense of like what the problem is, at least on a high level, and having some kind of theory for like why your efforts will go in a good direction rather than just being something to feel good. So yeah, glad that catching that. The second other point I wanted to bring up that's often like commonly misunderstood. I don't think you necessarily made this issue in your argument, but I think it's important to bring up and repeat as many times as possible, is that a unilateral self-sacrificing stop or pause is not going to work, and it's not on the table, and no one is seriously proposing that. Like a basic idea here is that if you are ever in a position where there is a stark choice between doing what's right and moral and ethical and good for the world and doing what you need to in order to stay competitive, the problem's already happened. Like, you're in a really bad bind. You should not be there. And then our focus wants to be on how do we prevent people from having to make that choice? So if you're like the US government and you're like worried about like, hey, if we pass a law that like slows down AI in our borders, well, what's to stop? Like, do we just have to do this and hope that China does the same thing and they don't defect? Like, no, that's terrible policy, and we wouldn't be asking for it. anything, since this is a global issue, it has to happen on a global level, which is, that's difficult, but that's where it is. And so, but like what you can do as an individual, whether you're an individual company or an individual government, is first to establish buy-in and say, if there was coordination, I would do my part. I wouldn't defect. I would be part of this. Like if there was a good provisions for monitoring and enforcement, and I could be assured that other people would follow this, I would rather coordinate than race. Like that is the step one, is to get people in that place of, if coordination was an option, I would take it above racing. We're not there yet. Right now, the reason we're racing is because people want to race, because they want to win. They want to establish global hegemony and take power over everyone else.
Hold on, a little bit of pushback there. I think the reason that we're racing is often there's also market pressures, right? I mean, there's Google, there's OpenAI, there's Anthropic. These guys have market pressures. They don't want to do anything that's harmful because then it destroys their market. But there's also competitors that don't have those market pressures. They don't need to design safety and security because they're trying to push into the market. They're not concerned about damage of control.
I believe competitive pressures are a thing and they need to be dealt with. I think it's easy to overstate how much that's what's driving the race. So for example, okay, there are competitive reasons why OpenAI can't just slow down development or divert more resources into their super alignment team or reestablish that. Like, there's reasons for that. And I actually don't really fault them for that. The thing that I very much fault them for is not lobbying to create stronger rules that bind not only them, but all of their competitors so that no one gets a competitive disadvantage by defecting. In fact, OpenAI has been actively lobbying against coordination or taking the teeth out of things. Now, they've gone to Congress and said, Sam Altman's gone to Congress and said, this is a really dangerous thing. If this goes wrong, it could be lights out for everyone, all that kind of stuff. But then when it actually comes down to lobbying and behind the scenes stuff, they've been pulling things like,
I don't know that they can legally do that. I don't know that they can legally advocate. I mean, if it's a private corporation and it has shareholders, which, then I don't know, it's the fiduciary responsibility, right? The guy is obligated to increase his job is to make this company make money. His job isn't to lobby the government to control his company. Like, I would think you should have zero expectation for the CEO of a company to lobby against their own best interest. Just don't expect it. I suppose it's hypothetically possible, but also from a public company sort of shareholder standpoint, no.
I mean, honestly, at this point, I'd be thrilled to see OpenAI take up a policy of not lobbying against coordination or actively making coordination impossible or trying to put in loopholes that give them a competitive advantage.
Their fiduciary responsibility is to remove regulations on their own corporations so that they can make their own money. It's not their job to lobby for controls in their market. That's the government's job or the people's job. Maybe.
Then, if that's the case, and I'd have to study the law a little bit more deeply to know the extent to which that's what the rules on lobbying are in terms of fiduciary duty to shareholders. But if that's true, then trying to speak to companies isn't really the issue. It makes more sense to go to governments directly, which is kind of what we have been doing. But the basic thing that I'm getting at is differentiating between the things that doing things because it gives you a competitive advantage versus changing the game so that this is not an issue. Basically, it's to say, if you're choosing between winning and losing morally, that's a false choice. There's a third choice, which is to coordinate. And that kind of avoids those. So that's the thing that we're trying to. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And I would say potentially if a company or CEO of a company was advocating that their competitors were highly regulated, that would be reasonable. And I think you're absolutely right. They should do that. OpenAI should be saying things like, we want to make sure that our competitors are safe. We want to make sure that there's lots of regulations to control them. And hey, if the regulations come back and control us too, hey, what can we do? We just want safety for the rest of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yes.
yeah, those kind of things could happen. So yeah, but you're right. I mean, the whole like capitalism, making money, they're turning intelligence into profits. It's a complicated issue, and I suppose
Sure.
I would agree with you that they should be working towards regulations. But you're right. So towards building a pause button that could actually be functional. Yeah, I agree with that side.
Yeah, and also actually, and then coming back to the fiduciary kind of stuff, you could say that like maybe the people in second and third and fourth place could make a pretty compelling argument to their shareholders, like if they wanted to, if this was what they actually wanted, would be to say like, hey, it looks like we might not win this race. There's like a bunch of competitors. We're just one of them. We're not even quite the front runner. We're close. We're competitive, but like the odds are a little bit against us. And so it would be a lot better if we could get this kind of stable state where we definitely get some share of the pie and we don't get this like get completely cut out. And that happens by binding our competitors. And we're not going to be able to bind our competitors unless we accept some binding for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And basically that kind of approach is, and not looking for ways to do that. Is the thing that I would fault them for, not for racing specifically. And that same basic concept applies to governments as well. I would not argue for any country to just shut down its operations and hope that others do the same thing, or allow them to get ahead and just take the morally virtuous route of losing. I would be expecting them and faulting them for not stating what they would like to happen, figuring out like what kinds of ways they would need to bind everyone else, and accepting similar bindings for themselves and expressing that, and then trying to figure out the details of like, how do we actually make this happen?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like there's a great argument here for sort of monopolistic control. I mean, a lot of these smaller player companies could be like, we feel like our competitors are going to develop a monopoly. And it's a reasonable thing to say, because it's like, well, OpenAI, they're literally the number one competitive programmer that generating code. We feel there's a danger that this company could become a monopoly. And in a lot of countries like the United States, there's antitrust laws and there's anti-monopoly laws. So potentially they could use angles like that to say, we want to regulate our competitor, not for our own personal benefit, but because we want to maintain an ecosystem of options in the marketplace.
Yeah. So I think you're understanding me there. And I guess the last thing I want to bring up, this is kind of a little disconnected from the last point, but in that question of proving safety versus proving danger, and I think the underlying, I'll just mention as an aside here that that's not my idea. That's a quote from either Max Tegmark or Stuart Russell. But the thing I want to get at there is this claim that you're making that no one's going to believe. Actually, I like that image you have of the board with all the lines between it and that sort of thing, is in terms of like what this looks. And that there are some people that see the pause AI or the concerns about existential risk in that way. But I don't think I think that's largely because it's a new idea and that the Overton window hasn't shifted yet, more than it is about the harms being speculative. Mm-hmm. And the analogy I would bring to is, do you believe in global warming? Like, as an example, the Earth has not heated by like several degrees to a degree where there's huge catastrophic harm. Large parts of the world are unlivable. The environment is being destroyed in a self-reinforcing process, and that causes like really big harms beyond just like a few slight increases that we've seen already, arguably, in weather patterns. And yet this idea that like things could go in a really bad way on the global ecosystem things
are continually sort of sliding in a bad way continuously as it appears.
There's some sliding that we can see already, but in terms of like really big bad things that have happened because of global warming, a lot of it's speculative. Mm-hmm. And yet that hasn't necessarily completely, I guess it probably has greatly weakened the environmentalist movement, but at least in terms of on an intellectual, like making the argument, they don't I don't think they come across as that, crazy person like drawing a bunch of lines and speculation. And there's a reason for that. And it's basically like the essence of how science works is that you have a theory and it makes small predictions and it makes big predictions. The big predictions are things that are really matter a lot if they're true. But they're hard to measure because it's like something in the future. You won't get a reset, all these reasons. But then there's also small predictions that you can measure, that you can see, and that don't really matter. They're just kind of on a toy model, but like they're something you can check. And the way this all integrates together is that the theory generates both of these. So when you're able to validate the small predictions, that gives you reason to trust the theory, which gives you reason to be confident in the big predictions. This is why global warming is accepted by scientists. Global warming in the sense of the big predictions about like what's going to happen to the world if we just keep it going for 50 years. And the reason for that is because there are observations that like don't matter in themselves, but validate the theory. And I think there's a similar dynamic happening with AI. It's a matter of getting that knowledge out there and saying, like, hey, there actually is a lot of evidence for it that validates the theory, which then points to these bigger things down the line.
Absolutely. And I would say probably something like in case of global warming, like I would say, you would say the catastrophic harm is 100%. Imagine the catastrophic harm is 100%. Imagine the catastrophic harm is like, okay, the temperatures have gone up so high. People are literally like wars over water, wars over food. We're in this catastrophic situation. That's like 100% of the damage that we would expect. And every year we sort of bite into that 100% of damage. And there's a little bit of evidence. Like maybe we're at 2%, maybe we're at 3%, maybe we're at 5%. And every year, the larger that we get into that full catastrophic situation, it becomes obvious that, we're heading towards the 100%. And right now we're at 5. Do we want to go to 10? Do we want to go to 20? Do we want to go to 50%? And I feel like that it would be nice if the damages from AI were in that sort of situation. And it was super obvious that these kind of things happen, but it's hard to say. I mean, the problem with how AI works, it's so quickly changing that we might not, like, the difference between 100% and 5% could be a matter of weeks, or who knows.
So the basic argument I'm hearing here is like in the case of global warming, it's kind of a linear trajectory from here to the catastrophic case where we see things getting a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. And it's like, then people can see that, say, oh, I see the pattern here. I don't like where this is going. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I get where you're talking about this. Whereas with AI, the damage follows a bit more of an exponential where it's like barely perceptible, a lot. And
possible,
not necessarily a phase change, but like the curve is steep enough that it's hard to react.
We can't be 100% sure what the potential issues could be with AI too. Like we have a lot of speculation about people like potentially unemployment could happen. Like I mentioned, the cybersecurity kind of thing. Maybe companies have a hard time operating. There's such a vast field of possibilities where in global warming, I mean, it's fairly clear. I mean, it's been well studied for decades now. We kind of know where it's going. We know what to measure. We know what to look for. With AI, it's just so much harder because it's so much more speculation. And it's just, brand new, like you say.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I get you there because the kinds of things that are evidence right now in terms of like the existential risk kind of stuff is more along the lines of like the alignment faking posed by Anthropic or the instrumental power seeking that we see like in the Apollo research kind of stuff. Basically things of like AI systems in toy environments, breaking out of their bounds, lying to developers, trying to preserve their goals, all these kind of things. And they're toy environments. Like this is stuff that causes zero damage, but it validates an underlying theory. Now, however, one thing I'm not going to push too hard on this because I get that the point you're making here is less about the concerns about X risk being valid and like on a logical, philosophical sense. I think we're kind of in agreement there, but more along the lines of, okay, well, yeah, this is valid if you really dig into it and you know how to look at this, but it's not going to play in terms of like popular knowledge and like what gets attention. Is that right?
Yeah, true. I mean, like I say, there's lots of options for potential evidence of harm. It's some of them are probably going to resonate a lot more with average human, like regular people, and some of them are potentially not going to resonate with people, but be very dangerous in ways that are difficult for us to understand. And I'm thinking about things like supply, like breaking supply chains and stuff. Like maybe people don't really resonate with that, but if that happens, it's really bad.
Yeah, so I think on that I'm pretty uncertain. And I could see that going a lot of different ways. It could be one of those things where the stuff that, like the reasonable arguments don't take, but then there's also a unreasonable argument that pushes in the same direction, and so it kind of works anyway. Getting into like the dynamics of public opinion, like that's pretty chaotic. I wouldn't put it past regular people to get things. Like sometimes it's really the elites that can be a lot more obstinate and stubborn than regular people are.
Yeah.
So it's like I put a big question mark there. I could see that going in a different direction. I don't want to underestimate the ability of regular people to like, and by regular I mean people whose focus is on something else.
Yeah,
because everyone's an insider to something, and everyone else is a normie, and there's nothing weird or special about us. It's just like this is a specialization. Other people have different specializations.
Yeah, and I mean, in certain industries, it makes more sense to focus on this. In a lot of industries, this has nothing to do with what they have to focus on and what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. So it makes sense. But I would also say that I mean, when you're talking about sort of elites or government or people in the government, I think it also goes both ways as well. There's a lot of people in the government that just do not care about this kind of thing. There's a lot of people in the government that develop a brain trust and have a lot of super smart advisors that come around and help them and tell them to try how to anticipate these kind of problems. There's a lot of people in government that could be super duper on the ball and on the game. So it's important to look for and find those people.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was something else I was going to bring up, but I kind of forgot what it was.
No worries. Where's my... Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the underlying question is, so actually let's go back to the claims. Has any of the things that I've said so far been relevant towards like the cruxes of claim one? Where do you feel like the disagreements are currently between the positions of pause AI is a great thing that we should be doing right now versus I like the ideal, but it's not going to work, and it actually might be better if we do this later.
No, I totally agree. I think I loved your analogy of the big red button, building the pause. Even building the consensus for the pause it is a good idea. It is something that should be done definitely before there's kind of an evidence of harm, something that could be advocated for, something that people should work towards. Let people know that there's ideas that can help us. I still feel like it's probably not. I'm not super hopeful on the ability to avoid catastrophic, but not catastrophic necessarily, but very damaging situations. I feel like those are going to happen, and when those happen, it's going to change the whole dynamic of the whole situation. And this is going to be a very dynamic situation. But I love the idea of putting together some great ideas, and I think building the big red button. I don't know if that I've read about something like that inside of the sort of safety concerns, but they do talk about it when you read through these safety. Some of their safety plans for some of these companies, they do talk about what conditions would we have to see in order for us to stop training a model. Not necessarily that they're going to do that, but again, I agree that sort of like global a global coordination would be a way to do it. Very difficult, but worth advocating towards it, because like I say, the harms could potentially be catastrophic, especially if it gets to the point where it's taking down parts of our digital infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just totally agree.
Remember two other concepts I want to bring out or points to make here. One, going back, this was the thing I forgot earlier in terms of that question about it's like whether it's been proven safe already, because there aren't harmful things happening, using that analogy of like the car that you think is going to blow up, even though it looks fine. Now, I'm also going to say, with a caveat right at the beginning, that this is kind of an idealized how things should be, not necessarily how they are. So saying like, I kind of, I'll say in advance that like, okay, that might be true, but that won't take, like, I think this is a valid objection. But just going on to saying it is that in terms of the proving safety, the reason it's not proven, I would argue that safety is not proven right now, is because there isn't something equivalent to a climate science of AI. Like the fundamentals of the trajectory that we're on, or what we can expect, is not fully established. There's like, I think the arguments for AI takeover, I think are pretty strong, but they're ultimately kind of back of the envelope conversations. They're not like really proven on a level of like going deep into the science, how all the neurons work. There is some intuitions and speculations going on, but that's not because the arguments are not good. It's because the fundamental knowledge of what's happening is not deep enough, and so the similar problems exist. Like there's an even less coherent argument for optimism. Like none of the arguments for any direction are really nailed down with a level of precision that we see with climate projections, and even those are a little bit speculative. And as long as that's true, as long as there isn't a way to be able to prove things about what is going to happen, as long as there isn't not expert consensus, like people who know a lot, Jan LeCun and Stuart Russell, like pull in very, very different directions. And that's not just because one of them's being obstinate or like going against the consensus, but because like there just isn't a consensus. As long as that's the case, then nothing is provable. Danger isn't provable, safety isn't provable. And so therefore safety is not proven. And so that's kind of where that's the kind of thing that I would want to see changed prior to that's where that's what's required to satisfy the burden of proof, is to actually make any claims provable. That has to happen first, then see where it goes.
I hear where you're going. Unfortunately, when I think about this in my mind, I feel like that this is probably not something that humans could understand. We're going to get to the point where we can't understand how, and we're already sort of there. We don't understand how large language models work. It's an inscrutable matrix of floating point numbers. We cannot understand how it works, and that makes it even more difficult. Like, yes, we can't prove harm, we can't prove safety, we can't prove anything. We don't understand how it works, and it's only getting more complicated by the day. It's not getting simpler.
Right, and that's ultimately why we need to stop development until that changes. And if that never changes, then we don't never build AI. I mean, that's kind of the idealized sort of thing, and it's not totally unprecedented. Like that idea of like we have to wait until there's damage before we can do anything about it. Like you'd get laughed out of the room if you did that in like a nuclear development or bioengineering, like that kind of stuff. There's like really robust safety kind of things that really take a security mindset in there, and it just happens that AI came out of startup culture where that was all based on move fast and break things.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you. Like, if you're going to build a biolab or you're going to build a nuclear factory, I mean, you always have to follow the rules. The reason why you have to follow the rules is because the evidence is way in the past. We've seen a lot of evidence of damage for these things before, and that's why we built all the rules. And that that really supports the theory. But yeah. I mean, I kind of agree. It's like, Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But
we agree on what should happen, and I don't really have a very strong argument for like that stuff will apply to AI, like in terms of like what takes on a popular sense, or in terms of like what actually flies in government, like and I guess the other point I want to make, and I think you'll also agree with this, but I just think it's important to be said, is that Yeah, I agree that the way things are going, we're probably going to run into a catastrophe, and like we're also putting a lot of work into like figuring out how we can make sure that there's a silver lining on it. But ultimately, I don't want there to be catastrophes, like for obvious reasons, in terms of like people get hurt by those. But also beyond that, I think we're in a better position. It just towards making good decisions that consider all angles prior to a catastrophe than after it. Yes, afterwards, there's a lot more of a bias towards caution and safety, which is good.
Right.
But there is I have a pretty big worry that if we kind of wait until something really big happens and like all the decision makings happens then we get something more like a stomp reflex, where there's like an overreaction and individuals like use it as a means for a power grab in some form, rather than just a very targeted, these are the unsafe things, these are the safe things. We're going to be like very careful in making these distinctions and making it based on like our best understanding of what happens and trying to develop that understanding further. If the regulation that we get is all based on fear rather than caution, we get accused of fear mongering a lot, but really it's caution mongering to prevent fear mongering in the future. Then like if we were to get our act together on coordination right now, we could come up with some things that allow for progress and technological growth and a lot of like all the good things that AI potentially offers, while limiting the bad things. If there's a big explosive sort of thing and that's what's motivating everything and it's all done in a rush, then there's a good chance that it will overstep. It will not actually deal with the real problems. People will take power and create new problems. So yeah, that's a thing too.
It's true. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons either way, but yeah, I totally agree. And this is actually a good distinction, a good point that I wanted to make from earlier. But we need to, it's always important to make the distinction between AI and AGI.
Yes.
AI can be very safe. It can do amazing stuff for us. It can fold proteins. It can
absolutely, yeah.
It can solve all kinds of help us solve scientific problems. It can help us study other issues. I mean, AI itself can be a great, it can drive our cars. It can help us do stuff. When these companies start building these generalized models that can write software and be agentic and make their own mind about what they want to do, these are the things that we need to definitely be watching for. And can be a very difficult distinction to make, even to an expert, let alone to a politician or a group of concerned citizens.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. So yeah, lots of good points there.
Okay, well, that's everything I have in my notes in reactions to these slides. So I'm kind of willing to go into conclusions or whatever else you want then. What's on your mind? Yeah.
I do have some conclusion slides. And I think that's about it. I think I have a slide at the end that's just basically like a bunch of question marks. Do we pause AI? There's a bunch of open questions like, do we pause AI to avoid AGI? Do we wait for intelligence for more evidence of harm? Maybe potentially like we want to avoid ASI. Do we want to avoid AGI? I'm super concerned about how these coding models, millions of these coding models are going to go rampant on the internet. What are we going to do about that? The whole software 1.0, software 2.0, and but my thing is like, do we keep pushing forward, hoping for the best? Can we even possibly plan for the worst? These are the kind of super important topics that we're talking about at this point, and I think that is worth engaging. And I'd also say, I just wrote this slide the other day or earlier, so I don't remember what it says. But definitely let your voice be heard. In the last few years, in the next few years, we will decide how the ideals and goals of humanity will be replaced by something else. I think this is entirely possible. Like if you're concerned with humanity is potentially going to change. The ideals and goals of humanity could change as we build this super intelligent systems that are going to coincide with us for at least some amount of time. So people should be thinking about this. I mean, definitely, like, comment down below, comment in videos, join Discord channels or other social groups. Learn about AI, learn about large language models, learn about self-improving. These are my sort of recommendations for what people should do. Talk to people, talk about technology. Talk about philosophy, talk about morality. These things are going to be changing how philosophy and morality work. Talk about art, talk amongst each other. We need to have sort of humanities conversations are very important right now. Things are changing quickly, and we all need to focus on what we really want. So that's kind of my message for that.
Yeah, I think I have a little concluding statement that going off of this I'd like to say here is that in my opinion, not everyone in AI safety believes this, but I think it's a pattern that I see is that fundamentally, in my view, the AI problem is a democracy problem. Or downstream of it anyway. Mm-hmm. If we had really good methods of coordination, I think we would have a lot of options and we'd be able to handle a lot of things. If it turns out that the control problem, as I was like writing in my substrate needs convergence series, if that is true, I think we'd be in a very good position to find that and like make the right choice. If AI is on a good track and like there's really nothing to worry about, coordination would put us in a really good place to be actually confident of that and not just based on blind optimism. If there's a particular way of building things that is good and other ways that are bad, like that would be in a place where we'd be able to find it. It would also put us in a position to make sure that even if it goes well and like doesn't destroy everything, but only does the things of the people who are creating it, the more everyone is involved, the more coordination is present, the more it's going to serve the benefit of everyone rather than just a few people getting what they want and leaving everyone else out in the cold. And so like creating that, like if we can create that coordination and be able to work together on this kind of stuff, that's going to make things just a lot better in all kinds of ways. It's going to make for a better process. And that's something that's kind of what I'm personally the most motivated by. Mm-hmm. And having that coordination would be able to help us with all sorts of things besides AI. And to be clear here, coordination does not necessarily mean a top-down world government authoritarian preventing any problems and telling people what to do. That's one form of coordination. But there are other forms, like if that centralized kind of thing, it has a lot of oversight and accountability, or if there's some form of decentralized governance that's like not giving lots of power to a single entity, that'd be fantastic. I think fully developed ideas for that are how that would actually work seem a little bit lacking, but the concept is really appealing. So I think people can agree on governance even if they disagree about government. And then also in terms of creating that coordination, the really critical thing is people need to be involved. One story I've heard from Felix de Simone, who's one of our leads in the U.S. branch of Pause AI. He was talking to a politician, I think it might have been a senator, about AI and existential risk, and they were like very sold on a lot of the intellectual arguments. So then Felix asked them, like, what would it take to actually be a leader on this issue and like to host a global summit or try to get the ball rolling on this coordination stuff? And the answer was like, I need to know that my constituents care about this. I need to have the political capital to be able to speak out and know that the people are behind me. And they just currently wasn't seeing that. And it doesn't, it takes like surprisingly little. Like the number this person quoted was like, if I got 5 different letters from concerned citizens who like actually put work into it next week, that would move the needle on my willingness to be a leader on this. Now, you could argue whether or not that was actually true, but like 5 people.
That's what a lot of people need. They just need a little bit of evidence. No one, like I don't want someone to have to take my word for it. I want a piece. I want letters from people that I can actually take to the leadership that I'm part of, and just say, here's some evidence. Don't believe me. My constituents are concerned about it, so I think we should be concerned about it. A tiny amount of evidence can go a long way.
Right. So yeah, ultimately what I'm getting at here is like, yeah, this engagement is really important. It could be really powerful, and that's specifically because so many people are not engaged. And so like if you can break that norm, then you can have a lot more impact than you might think. And now also I want to say, like, over this course of this conversation, we've had some things we agree about. We have some things we disagree about. I've had some other talks with other people where we disagreed a lot more. I think that's fine. It's okay for people to disagree, and that's the way we're going to get to good decisions, is not by having a few really smart people figure everything out and just listen to them. Sure. It's going to come from having a lot of voices and getting good at talking to each other and hashing out our disagreements and finding where the cruxes are, and being willing to change your minds a little bit, or at least to be able to be civil to each other. And so one thing I would also advocate to everyone, even if you don't have time to just take on another thing, like there's too much in your life to add AI to the list of things that you're worried about. I mean, I think it should have a higher priority, obviously, given what I think is going to happen with it. But like, okay, so let's say you haven't bought into that, you don't have the time to dig into it enough to change your mind. Okay, cool. Like, one thing I would say that's just for everyone is to just be more engaged, and even if that isn't politically, in terms of talking to senators and writing to them or everything else, getting better at conflict resolution. And being able to disagree without being disagreeable. So much of the reason that elites are able to get away with just doing whatever they want is because the general public is paralyzed by conflict. When people care about things, someone else cares about the opposite thing just as much, and then they just yell at each other and don't get anywhere. Right. So the more, like, if you can just there's different mindsets towards helping out. Some people are like I have this essay that I have on my blog. It's about the Hogwarts Guide to Morality, and kind of taking 4 different mindsets towards like what's good and what are problems. There's like the Ravenclaw mindset, which is very much what I'm about, of like trying to figure things out and try to, get at misconceptions and try to find the truth. That's just one approach. Another one is the Gryffindor approach of seeing things as like a good versus evil battle, and that what really it takes is bravery and engagement. There's a lot of strength to that as well. And then there's the Slytherin mindset of like trying to focus on where the power is and where are the incentives. And that's a really important thing to consider as well. If you're not thinking about that, your ideas just aren't going to work. But then lastly, what I'm kind of talking about right now is that I have a lot of empathy for is the Hufflepuff mindset of like what's really needed is kindness, and to be able to create a bubble or garden of things that are good and have that expand outwards. So like that's kind of what I'm speaking to right now, is if you have that view of like, I just want to live a good life and like be part of a solution in my own little bubble, then just being good at communicating with people and getting past disagreements and listening and having real conversations, the more that happens, the more that just unblocks everything else, even if it's a small way. So that's something I kind of want to leave people with.
No, you're right. And the coordination, I mean, it leads toward the coordination. And I think you're right. I watched a video recently that talked about coordination specifically, and it was about shared resources. So it was like something about like farmers that were sharing their cattle on a field, and they did a bunch of studies back in the 60s. And basically, the more the people that had to have this shared resource talked with each other, the less conflict there was. It was a very simple solution. Sharing information just resolves conflicts, allow people to agree, allow people to move together, have a shared purpose. Work together for their own individual benefits. They also benefit the community. I mean, just coordinating and sharing with people is the best way to do that. And hell, like, this is the information age. There's no excuse. There's no excuse for us not to share, talk, communicate with people. It doesn't even have to be someone on your block. It could be someone on the other side of the world. So yes, absolutely coordinate, talk, share with people. I mean, 100% agree.
All right. And with that, thank you very much for facilitating this conversation.
Absolutely.
That's part of it.
I'll post my slides on Pause Discord. Other people can comment, and maybe we can talk about it again if and when we have some good feedback.